Hey everybody, what's up? Ehren here, Question Period Canada. Yesterday was a crazy day in the House of Parliament. They went at it like cats and dogs. I've never seen Poilievre have so many questions in one sitting. It was a lot of fun. So, what we're going to be doing right away is jumping into Question Period. We got it ready to go.
Oral questions. Questions
Here we go.
orales.
Questions orales.
The Honourable Leader
Thursday should be good.
La communauté juive est si
The Jewish community is being targeted in Montreal.
alone. This is what's happened. A Montreal synagogue has been firebombed. A hate preacher has called for the extermination of Jews. Jewish students have been called the K word. Terrorists fired bullets at 2 different schools. And the UK Foreign Office has warned of likely terrorist attacks in Canada. We've all seen the Prime Minister's theatrical words, but what concrete steps has he taken this week to protect Jews and all Canadians?
Opening up with English. That's fun. Doesn't happen very often in Question Period.
Speaker, and I thank the Honourable
no.
Leader of the Opposition for that really important question. We condemn unequivocally the attempted firebombing, the shooting at 2 Jewish schools overnight last night in Montreal. There is no room and there is no place for anti-Semitism in Canada. There is no room, there is no place for hate. There is no room and there is no place for violence. Mr. Speaker, we condemn this unequivocally. We stand with Jewish Canadians across the country. The SPVM in Montreal is investigating, and we will continue to monitor this situation, call for calm, and ensure that Canadians are safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hopefully she'll bring some energy because she's usually pretty boring like this.
Ne vont pas protéger.
Fine words don't protect people. Real action is needed. Now, the scandal surrounding the Prime Minister's office continues to grow. We now know that this is similar in scope to the sponsorship scandal, but the president of the fund spent $200,000 of taxpayer money on their own business. Why did the Prime Minister not fire this person?
Good question. We probably know the answer. Probably not going to get an answer right here.
Thank the leader of the opposition for the question, but Mr. Speaker, let me bring a bit of facts into the fairy tale of the leader of the opposition. Mr. Speaker, from the moment that I learned that there was any allegations of wrongdoing, I demanded that there was a third-party investigation, Mr. Speaker. Upon receiving the report, Mr. Speaker, we demanded that there be corrective action at the management level and at the board level. Mr. Speaker, we expect the highest level of governance from any entity that receive money from the Government of Canada.
He's a weird little guy, FCP. It's pretty weird.
The Prime Minister have known for 6 months of the scandal brewing at their green slush fund, $1 billion fund that one of its own public servants compared to the sponsorship scandal and said there was money for nothing. Yesterday, Canadians learned that the chair of this fund directed $200,000 tax dollars to her own company. What? That minister has known that for 6 months. Why has this Liberal chair not been fired from this job?
The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie le chef de l'opposition pour...
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. Let me bring some facts forward to the Leader of the Opposition story. The second we heard that there were allegations about managing that fund, I asked for an external investigation in order to shed light on the situation. On the basis of the results we obtained, I asked for corrective measures to be made. We expect the highest level of governance for agencies that manage taxpayer money, and we will continue to investigate.
The Honourable Leader
FCP will run out of energy very quickly.
Years, not only is the Prime Minister
he
not
always
worth the
does.
cost, he still does not have a climate plan. He said that if Canadians paid his carbon tax, it would save the world, but here are the facts. Canada now ranks 58th out of 63 in climate action.
Good.
Canada is the only G7 country not to have reduced its emissions below 1990 levels. The Prime Minister has missed 7 of 8 of his targets over the last decade. And finally, according to a bombshell report by his own Environment Commissioner this week, he will not hit his 2030 Paris Accord targets. Mr. Speaker, why won't the Prime Minister just admit he doesn't have a climate plan, he has a tax plan?
I think that's true. That's how I feel.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what the Leader of the Opposition is saying in this House is factually incorrect. Facts. We have the best performance in terms of greenhouse gas reduction since 2019, Mr. Speaker. Fact. We have a plan that has been applauded by environmental organization, research organization, municipalities, even oil companies have applauded our climate plan, Mr. Speaker. And this morning in the Environmental Committee, the Commissioner to the Environment and Sustainable Development said that not only pollution pricing is working, but it is responsible for 30% of emission reduced in Canada since 2019. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Here's a piece of paper with a bunch of deceptions on it. Would you read that in front of the country?
And the year that followed, because that year was the only year in which emissions went down because the economy was locked down, Mr. Speaker. In every other of the 8 years this Prime Minister has been in power, he has missed his emissions targets. He now ranks 58th out of 63 nations. He leads the only country in the G7 that has not reduced its emissions below 1990 levels. And his own Environment Commissioner says he will not hit his Paris targets. So, will they finally admit that after 8 years, this carbon tax is all pain and no gain?
Maybe this is the time that they're going to admit that.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, what the Leader of the Opposition is saying is still factually incorrect because we haven't missed any of our targets. The only target we have is for 2030. Canada has missed many targets because for 10 years, the Conservative Party did nothing to fight climate change. They did nothing to support clean energy. They did nothing to support electrification of transportation. They did nothing on adaptation, Mr. Speaker. That's why Canada's been missing our targets. This government, this Prime Minister, we will meet our targets. We're 85% to our 20 targets already, Mr. Speaker.
I find it pretty funny that they're blaming the Harper government. That's a long time ago. They had a chance to improve.
Mr. Speaker, Premier François Legault and Premier Doug Ford publicly requested a call for tenders to replace the Aurora aircraft. That's all they're asking for, a call for tenders. The Liberals have to stop hurting Quebec's economy and our aerospace industry. They have no business offering a $9 billion untendered contract to Boeing at the expense of Bombardier. They have no business giving Quebecers taxpayer money to Americans without even letting our own workers compete. That's what Liberal policies against Quebec are all about. When will they issue a call for tender?
L'honorable ministre.
Oh, the block.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for asking this important question. It allows me to say just how important the aerospace industry is in Quebec and the country. $25 million in contribution to the GDP. Many jobs in the aerospace industry are made available through this industry. We will continue to support this industry over the next several years.
I had somebody in the comments mention to me that he went to a seminary.
Mr. Speaker.
And that might explain why he's so weird in his deliverance when he's speaking.
And yet that's too much for the Liberals.
I don't know.
They're always there for oil companies in the West. They're always there for the auto industry in Ontario. When it's time to be there for aerospace in Quebec, they're there all right, but only to do harm. They graciously give taxpayers' money to the Americans to give jobs to Americans instead of Quebecers. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Industry is a Quebecer. When's he going to stand up and defend Quebec, put the offer on the table, and announce a call for tender?
Yeah. Maybe he has a good point. I don't know. But I find the Bloc Québécois it's a strange idea.
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for pointing out the extraordinary work that the Ministry of Industry and other ministers are doing for Quebecers every single day.
It's funny.
An example that I'm sure he's aware of is the Davie Shipyard. Since March 2023, the Davie Shipyard is part of the new naval building strategy in Canada, thanks to the leadership of the Liberal MPs in Quebec.
Jean-Yves is a
The
weirdo.
honourable member for
Right there.
Rosemont-Patrie.
Monsieur le Président, c'est une bonne journée.
Mr. Speaker, it's a good day for workers in our country.
That's good.
The NDP got a historic result. Anti-scab legislation that will give workers more power to demand fairer wages and better working conditions.
How?
We used the balance of power in this parliament to get legislation the Liberals had always refused. From now on, there will be a real balance at the bargaining table to avoid protracted disputes like those at the Port of Quebec. Will the minister commit to working with us to make this legislation a reality as soon as possible?
Oh, he's talking about an idea, not an accomplishment.
L'honorable ministre.
The honourable minister.
Mr.
Makes more
Speaker,
sense.
today is indeed a historic day for workers right across this country.
He's such an ass.
Workers in this country have been looking for replacement worker ban legislation for generations. And today we delivered, we tabled this legislation. It was done properly. It was done in great spirit and with a great deal of work and cooperation with the honourable member and many members of his team. I think we have come forward and I present to this House a simple but historic and meaningful piece of legislation for workers right across this country. Thank you, Mr.
Oh, he's so dramatic. I don't know what he's on. He's on his ego, I guess. Flies on that.
The honourable member from New Westminster, Burnaby.
Anti-scab legislation thanks to the NDP, Mr. Speaker. Now, Loblaws and Walmart have rejected the government's voluntary code of conduct on grocery pricing. That's 40% of the Canadian market. That means that the government's voluntary plan has failed. Now, Conservatives have never raised the issue of food price gouging, but Liberals have a choice thanks to the NDP. Will they stand up against food price gouging that hurts so many Canadian families? Will they adopt the NDP bill to lower food prices now?
It's weird when the coalition does that to themselves.
Mr. Speaker,
It's like,
we did even more than that, Mr.
doesn't make
Speaker.
sense.
For the first time in Canada's history, we called all the CEOs to come to Ottawa to tell them one thing, Mr. Speaker. We expressed the frustration of 40 million Canadians, Mr. Speaker. We expect
know
everyone
this speech.
to do their part, including signing the Grocery Code of Conduct, Mr. Speaker, to help stabilize prices in Canada. But, Mr. Speaker, there's one thing that the member on the other side can do to help Canadians is to vote for C-56 so that we can reform competition and ensure that we have more competition in this country. Why won't they act?
I made a short with him in it, and that was the exact same thing you said. Exact.
L'honorable député de Louis-Saint-Laurent.
Ridiculous.
Monsieur le Président, en matière d'environnement,
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the environment, the costly Liberal
I
Bloc
like
coalition
Gerard Detel.
has a tax plan, not an
Tense.
environmental plan. And what's the result? Is that this association with the Bloc is bad news because the Bloc Québécois wants to significantly increase taxes and the Liberals are on board. The Commissioner of the Environment concluded that Canada is not going to meet its 2030 target. They have been focusing on this for 8 years, but is someone in this government going to say that the reality is that they actually have a tax plan, not an environmental plan?
It is a tax
Honourable
plan, not
Minister
an
of the
environmental
Environment.
plan. I always thought that.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor and dignity to keep the promises that we made to Canadians during the last election. We agreed to putting a price on pollution. The Conservatives promised the same, but then they're backing down. We have clean fuel standards, and the Conservatives offered the same thing, but then they've backed down. I don't understand why Canadians would believe anything the Conservative Party has to say. We can't trust them, not on the environment, not on the economy, and not on affordability.
Stephen Guilbeault just had the words, his honor and dignity come out of his mouth.
Nothing personal, but I'm going to address the Minister of the Environment directly. He has defended the environment throughout his entire career, and yet, just a few days ago, he accepted a carve-out from the carbon tax. This minister, full of honor and dignity, Can he rise and say that he's pleased to see that we have a carve-out in the carbon tax? Clearly, they have a tax plan, not an environmental plan.
It's pretty good. He was fired up right there. Too bad he never speaks English.
All members know that all questions and answers need to be directed through the chair. The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Through you, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to respond to my honourable colleague that I am proud to be part of a government that not only believes that climate change is happening, but is fighting to set up measures which are working. We went from 12% an increase of greenhouse gas emissions to 8% above the 2005 levels. Certainly not thanks to the Conservative Party, because they did nothing for 10 years. The plan is working. We're within 85% of our 2030 objective. I agree with the Commissioner that there's work to be done. That's why Canadians have to continue to support us so that we can continue to move forward on the fight against climate change and not move back into the Stone Age like the Conservative Party.
From Wellington, Halton
That's one of their lines about the Stone Age.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this government's record on climate change is in. The opening sentence of the Environment Commissioner's report says it all. The federal government is not on track to meet the 2030 target. Wow. It's now clear the government's environmental plan is a mishmash of regulations and taxes that aren't working. And it's not just clear to the Commissioner, it was also clear to COP27, where Canada was ranked 58 out of 63 countries for climate change performance. Change starts with acknowledging failure. Will the government?
I wonder who the countries we finished ahead of were. I wonder how bad their pollution is.
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find it quite ironic that this member campaigned for the leadership of his party on a carbon taxing platform, Mr. Speaker. And now all of a sudden it doesn't work. He doesn't believe in it. Well, this morning, the Commissioner to the Environment and Sustainable Development was at the Environment Committee, and this is what he said. He said that not only our pollution pricing is working, but it is responsible for up to 30% of emission reduced in Canada since 2019, Mr. Speaker. They don't want to talk about climate change because they don't want to talk about the fact that they're buddying up with their friends in the big oil companies, and God forbid that we would do anything to affect their profits. We want to fight climate change, and we want to help Canadians in the process, Mr. Speaker.
Is he wearing a leather tie? Is that red leather?
Wellington, Halton Hills.
Speaker, I campaign on a revenue negative carbon tax. This government's environmental plan is revenue positive and a mishmash of taxes and regulations which is dragging the Canadian economy down. Emissions still haven't risen to pre-pandemic highs, and that's because the economy still hasn't recovered. Per capita GDP and productivity are lower this year than in 2017. After 8 years, will the government admit that its environmental plan isn't working, its economic plan isn't working, with productivity and per capita GDP lower today than 6 years ago?
Good for you, Michael Chomp. That was good. That was good. You don't see them very often admit that what the opponent said is true. And he said, yeah, that is my tax, but it was not going to generate revenue like yours does. That's
Speaker,
interesting.
we'll take no lessons from these conservatives, Mr. Speaker.
He's carbon copy.
Mr. Speaker, what I'm surprised about, not only do they not have a climate plan, they don't even have an economic plan, Mr. Speaker. Their only plan is to cut services, cut investment, cut programs in Canada. Mr. Speaker, I have some piece of good news for you, Mr. Speaker. Today, the OECD ranked Canada third in the world for foreign investment attraction, Mr. Speaker. Our plan is working. We're creating prosperity. We're creating jobs. We're building Canada of the 21st century.
Holy moly. He flew off. He's an entertaining clown, if nothing else. You've got to have
The honourable member
a heel in the game, right?
They can huff and they can puff, but their carbon tax house is falling down because it was built on two pillars which have completely collapsed. The first, that it is revenue neutral. Well, the Prime Minister's own budget watchdog has said that Canadians pay far more in the tax than anything they hope to receive. The second is that it would allow the government to hit their own emissions targets. Well, the Liberal-appointed Environment Commissioner confirmed this week that they have no hope of hitting their targets even with the carbon tax. So after 8 years of failure, will the Prime Minister put his ego aside, admit he has a tax plan, not an environmental plan?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, we're getting there. We're 85.
I just want to warn everybody, I'm having internet connection issues, so if I drop out, I apologize for that. I plan on staying. I can't monitor YouTube and do this at the same time, but I just got a message saying that my connection's not great, so I'm hoping that we'll get through it.
The Honourable Minister from the top, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are getting there. We're 85% of meeting our 2030 targets. But do you know what's worse than not even trying? Is not even being willing to admit that climate change exists. Last week, the leader of the opposition was asked in a scrum right over there if he would meet the Paris target. And it was like a deer in front of headlights, Mr. Speaker. He couldn't even answer the question as to whether or not Canada would meet our Paris target. He wouldn't even answer the question. On this side of the House, we are doing everything we can to achieve our 2030 targets, as opposed to the Conservative Party, who want to bring us back to the Stone Age, Mr. Speaker.
Back to the Stone Age, he says. I'm currently cold and hungry. That sounds like the Stone Age.
His own government has admitted that they're not going to hit those targets, Mr. Speaker. And they're getting there? Does somebody have a participation trophy we could...
It's funny. It's good.
Maybe they would get there faster if they stopped saying no to clean energy projects, like when they killed a tidal electricity project in Atlantic Canada that would have created zero emissions power for Canadians, or when they say no to nuclear, when they say no to carbon capture. There were 18 LNG terminals on the books when this Prime Minister took office. 0 have been completed. So instead of canceling clean energy projects, why don't they cancel their carbon tax?
Hey, it's a good idea. Axe the tax. It's getting fun, man. Yesterday was pretty crazy, so today has a lot to live up to. It's pretty good so far.
The Honourable Member for Natural Resources.
Pretty good.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As is too frequently the case in this House, the member is just factually wrong. At the end of the day, the previous Conservative government got almost nothing built, including 0 LNG facilities, because it actually gutted the environmental assessment process. It paid no heed to environmental impacts. It did not have a climate plan. At the end of the day, we have put in place measures to ensure that we are going to see good projects go ahead going forward, including offshore wind in Atlantic Canada, battery manufacturing plants in Bécancour, the Volkswagen electric vehicle plant, Air Products hydrogen plant, and a whole range of other things. You have to have a climate plan if you want to have an economic plan. You have neither.
He's flipping out too. Everybody's getting hot. It's great. Okay, and Greg is like sort of falling in line. This is the first time that he's standing up and doing his button and oh, good for him. Maybe he will learn. It's been rough so far.
Mr.
Really
Speaker,
rough.
Today, the Bloc Québécois unveiled its expectations for the November 21 economic update. 7 responsible, but above all, urgent demands were put forward: an emergency fund for homelessness, with winter just around the corner, a $50 million emergency fund for the media,
got a funny
and a one-year postponement of the repayment of the emergency account with no loss of subsidy. The minister will understand that the key word is emergency. Will she include these urgent measures in the economic update?
L'honorable Ministre.
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I think my colleague
Randy Bolsonau's a pretty funny little guy.
enthusiasm for the
Watch,
fall
he'll bob and
economic
weave with
update.
his hand in his pocket.
Canada's economic bases are solid. We're getting results for Canadians. 1 million Quebecers and Canadians more are working compared to before the pandemic. We have the greatest G7 economy going into 2024. We will continue building an economy that works for everyone, and we're going to unveil our plan on November 21 when the Minister of Finance will reveal the fall economic update. Before I proceed, I just want to encourage members to stay in their seats until I recognize you.
I
know
spoke
that
too
members
soon.
Want to be ready to ask a question or answer one. As you know,
Sorry,
I will
guys.
give you a 10-second signal, which is a good time to get up because I don't want to be confused about who's going to take the floor. The Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll remind you that being responsible in the current economic climate isn't austerity. It's about investing intelligently. To counter the housing crisis, the Bloc is proposing funding for more than 100,000 housing units that could be ready as early as next July. To support seniors during inflation, we're calling for an increase in old age pensions to support everyone 65 and older. To fight climate change, we're calling for an end to fossil fuel subsidies. That's what being responsible is about. Will the government include our responsible proposals in its economic update? Thank you. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to hear that my dear colleague is very aware of the fact that we're having a fall economic update on November 21, and we're making responsible investments for the future. We're investing in Bécancour, in Air Products in Edmonton. We're investing all over the country to build a green economy for the future, which will put people to work from coast to coast to coast. We're going to work on our fall economic update and the investments included in it.
I don't know, Randy. Maybe.
The Honourable Member
I don't
for
think
Terrebonne.
so. All the Bloc Québécois came out to play today.
Being responsible with the fall economic update means avoiding 220,000 bankruptcies among small and medium businesses. We need to defer repayment of the emergency account loans for 1 year with no loss of subsidy. They're just asking for a little flexibility. I hope the Minister of Finance, because in her own riding, 40 small and medium businesses informed the Federation of Independent Businesses that they're facing bankruptcy. In the fall economic update, what is she going to say to the 40 businesses in her own riding? Is she going to help them or let them be abandoned?
Le jour de Bloc. Bloc Day.
The Honourable Minister of Small Business.
I used to own a
Mr.
business.
Speaker, we are there for small and medium businesses. We've already granted small and medium businesses an additional year to access the loan repayment. We're offering more flexibility, more time to access benefits. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
After 8 years of this Liberal government, the Prime Minister's own Environment Commissioner confirmed that he will not meet his targets. He missed 88% of it. Worse, they missed targets in 7 out of the 8 years they have been in power, and the only year they hit the targets is when the economy was shut down for COVID. Still, they insist on punishing Canadians with their carbon tax chaos. So why are these Liberals burying their head in the sand and pretending like the carbon tax is working when Canadians know it isn't?
And then they're going to say that 8 out of 10 families are getting more back than they pay in. Then why the hell would you have the tax?
To actually watch the proceedings from the Environment Committee this morning, where the Commissioner to the Environment and Climate Change said that not only carbon pricing is working, but it's responsible for 30% of the emissions we've seen in Canada since we've took office, Mr. Speaker. Nothing that would have happened under the Conservative Party. They had no plan to fight climate change. They had no plan to develop the economy. They had no plan for renewable energy, for clean electricity, for electrification of transportation. That's why Canada is so far lagging behind other countries. We're playing catch up, Mr. Speaker, but thanks to all of our efforts, we're getting there. No thanks to the Conservative Party.
Is that a red leather tie?
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
Speaker, nobody believes them anymore. They lean on a tax that punishes Canadians that won't meet their own targets. They say no to carbon capture and storage. The Environment Minister himself opposes nuclear. They've delayed approvals to 25 years to mine the minerals we need to get cleaner power. They are tax collectors in 58th place out of 63 countries on climate change. Will they save us the sanctimony, stop killing clean energy projects, and cancel their failed and now selectively applied carbon tax?
Watch the look. She keeps it going. Watch, see, yeah, she does it every time. A lot of them do that, but she does it well.
As I've said before in this House, people may be entitled to their opinions, but they're not entitled to their own facts. The Commissioner this morning actually said that it is effective and it is working, and so do all of the academic. I don't know where you get your this person gets her facts, but at the end of the day, the facts are the facts are the facts. The fact is these folks don't have a plan for climate change, but they also don't have a plan for the economy. In fact, right now in committee, in Natural Resources Committee, they are blocking moving forward with Bill C-49, which is about enabling the development of an offshore wind and a hydrogen program program in Atlantic Canada, something supported by the Conservative Premier of Nova Scotia and the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. It is bizarre, Mr. Speaker.
It's happened on a couple of occasions today, and I'd like to remind all members that to make sure that they direct their comments through the chair and not directly to other members. The honourable member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
8 years time.
Rick Perkins in the batter's box.
Zero. Yeah. And after 8 years of that zero government, Canadians know that their environmental record is nothing but hot air and hypocrisy. The Bay of Fundy can supply green tidal energy to all of Nova Scotia and make us a net exporter of green energy. Yeah. The only successful project to harness the power of the Bay of Fundy, delivering endless green energy, was killed by these Liberals when they refused to renew the permit. They killed capital investment in tidal power. Why does this Prime Minister claim to support green energy but veto green tidal projects?
There we go.
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
You know what is the height of hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker? It's a member of Parliament who was elected on a campaign platform that included a price on pollution who now disavows that every day in this House. It's an Atlantic Canadian member of Parliament who is actively opposing the development of a major offshore wind and hydrogen project in Nova Scotia in direct opposition to the Conservative Premier of his province. That, Mr. Speaker, is the height of hypocrisy.
The height of hypocrisy? They're both saying that they want to harness green sources of energy.
Member from North Island, Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, when women were invited into all military operations in 1989 and submarine services in 2001, they entered an environment not made for them. Trailblazers, these women endured through discrimination and lack of support, and the physical and mental outcomes they dealt with were not documented. Now, as veterans, they are often underserved because of a lack of documentation. When will this government honor servicewomen and make it right?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's important to listen to the stories of women, veterans, and for our government to ensure that we are addressing their needs. While the work of the Parliamentary Committee is independent, and they're doing a study on this very task, for undertaking this important study on women veterans, we commit to acting on those. We urge all parliamentarians to put aside any partisan politics in order to take time and listen to those women and hear what they have to say so we can make their lives a lot much better in the future. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Hamilton Centre.
UN agencies report over 10,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed and 1.5 million have been displaced by the Israeli siege and bombardment on Gaza since October 7th. UN experts say that these attacks constitute war crimes of collective punishment and ethnic cleansing. Shamefully, the Prime Minister directed his ambassador to abstain from a vote on an immediate ceasefire in Gaza on the UN General Assembly, and yesterday Liberals and Conservatives voted against our motion calling for the same. So my question is, how many Palestinian deaths will be enough for the Prime Minister to find the moral courage to call for a ceasefire?
He's getting pretty fired up. Do you think,
the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
What do you think our role as Canadians are in
the
issues that they're having in Gaza?
Suffering of all Palestinian civilians. What is unfolding in Gaza is a
Retire,
human tragedy.
Pam.
We must be guided by human dignity. All civilians, Israeli and Palestinian, are equal and must be protected, and international law must be respected. Canada stands firmly with Israeli and Palestinian peoples in their right to live in peace, security, with dignity, and without fear. We will continue to support diplomatic discussions on humanitarian pauses. We need Canadians to leave, hostages to be released, and humanitarian aid to get in. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Pam always seems like she's right on the edge of a
For
breakdown.
Kingston and the Islands.
Mr. Speaker, last June,
And I've
the
seen her
Conservative
cry like
member
4
from
times.
New Brunswick
I haven't been doing that this
attended
long.
a meeting in England held by the International Democracy Union and paid for by the Danube Institute, a right-wing Hungarian think tank.
I'm going to ask the member to try to get to the point as if this relates to government business or to committee chair business.
What's going on?
A right-wing Hungarian think tank that just last month published a paper quoting the stakes of the Russia-Ukraine war are not Ukraine's sovereignty, but the victory of NATO, the expansion of the U.S. deep state, and wokeism. Coincidentally, for weeks, Conservative MPs have been blocking the modernized trade agreement with Ukraine. Can the minister explain why this agreement is so important for Ukraine?
That's interesting. What is going on? I'm confused.
Members know that I've made it clear under a couple of occasions over the last few days and this week that we will be looking at the issue which was raised by all House leaders, with the exception of one, has raised the issue of the importance of having questions which deal with the administration of government or questions which have to deal to committee chairs. So I have not ruled on this yet, and for this week I've been letting these questions go. If there is a minister that is going to respond, I will allow it this week to be consistent. But I would like to ask all members, please,
he will allow it
to try to refrain from this until the Speaker has made his ruling. The honourable member, the honourable minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for Kingston and the Islands for that question. This is a high standard trade agreement that's good for Canadian and Ukrainian businesses. It's also a strong endorsement of Ukraine's territorial
member
and
of the
economic
WEF
sovereignty as they fight for democracy. We're going to continue to stand with our businesses, including our SMEs and exporters who want to be a part of rebuilding Ukraine, even as the Conservatives try and stall this legislation and dismiss it as woke. Conservatives are standing in the very way of progress for Ukraine, and frankly, they should be ashamed.
The honourable member from Foothills.
After 7 years of this NDP Liberal government, this Prime Minister has not hit a single emissions target. In fact, Canada is ranked 58 out of 63 countries when it comes to climate action performance. It's clear this Prime Minister doesn't have, the only green plan this Prime Minister has is diverting greenbacks from his carbon tax to his Liberal friends. That's right. But when our most important allies, Germany and Japan, come to Canada for help, for clean Canadian LNG, he turns his back. Exactly. Why does this Prime Minister support diverting Canadian tax dollars to a $1 billion green slush fund instead of unleashing clean Canadian energy the world desperately needs?
I like Clark Kent. He's pretty good.
Well, the Conservatives' reckless and risky inaction on climate change has indeed gone global. They don't have a plan for Canada. They won't commit to the Paris targets. And now they're blocking a trade deal with Ukraine that has the most comprehensive and ambitious environment chapter in a free trade agreement by Canada. If Ukraine can fight Russia and prioritize fighting climate change at the same time, so can we, and we are.
Hear, hear. The honourable member from Foothills.
Well, the minister is clearly misleading Canadians. The Liberals don't have an environment plan. What they have is a political agenda. The Prime Minister has 2 carbon tax punishing Canadian families, which we know now does not reduce emissions. But when his polls plummet in Atlantic Canada, he can remove the carbon tax from home heating oil, the energy source with the highest emissions. Well, at the same time, the Liberal Environment Minister, under a wave of red tape, kills a tidal energy project which would have provided clean electricity for the East Coast. Yeah. So why is the Prime Minister killing clean Canadian energy while his carbon taxes force Canadians to freeze in the dark?
Exactly. He's making good points. It's very well spoken.
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Haven't seen him use paper hardly ever.
Incredibly ironical to hear a Conservative member of Parliament talk about the lack of an environmental plan. I mean, we went through 10 years under Prime Minister Harper where there was no regard for the environment, there was no climate plan. We were seen as the dinosaur in the international community because of the lack of any action. This government has put in place a comprehensive climate plan, a robust environmental plan to protect biodiversity in this country, and an economic plan that acknowledges the reality of climate change, is creating good jobs and economic opportunity in every province and territory in this country. Really? My goodness.
John Barlow and Jonathan Wilkinson had a real great battle. I forget if it was yesterday or Tuesday.
Of environmental failure, the costly Bloc Liberal coalition is not worth the cost to the environment. The carbon tax, which the Bloc wants to increase, is not an environmental plan, but a tax plan. Tax Canadians. which has failed to meet Canada's environmental goals in 7 of the 8 years of this Liberal government. In fact, Canada is at the bottom of the pack out of 63. After these successive failures, will the PM finally admit that he doesn't have an environmental plan, but a tax one?
Just a tax plan.
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to correct my colleague. What he said is inaccurate.
Bet he would.
Not only is the carbon tax working, but the Commissioner confirmed this morning at the Environment Committee, and I would invite my colleague to listen to the minutes from this meeting. But not only is the carbon tax working, but it's the equivalent of removing 11,000 vehicles from the road. Our plan is working. We're on track to attaining our objectives, but it's certainly not thanks to the Conservative Party that we're going to get there. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. In the meantime, Mr. Speaker, 1/4 of Canadians have to turn to assistance to meet their housing and food needs. After 8 years of his tax plan, this Prime Minister is not worth the environmental cost. The Liberals have killed all clean energy projects in Canada. There was a national gas project in Saguenay, and an environment minister is opposed to the nuclear power. And they're against innovative carbon capture and storage projects. He has to admit, the minister, that the environmental plan isn't working. When will the government stop killing clean energy products and admit their plan isn't working? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. My colleague has also said something inaccurate. When we took power, online production went up by 60%. GM, Stellantis, Northvolt. These are all projects that the Conservatives opposed. We've invested in Quebec and Ontario in batteries, and we are here to create a sustainable environment and economy for future Canadians. And the Conservatives have no plan for the economy or the fight against climate change, and no plan for affordability. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, in the next few weeks, the government will be releasing its fall economic update. I think it's a great opportunity to show that this government is concerned about the future of information. Our media are strutting, our local media, our electronic media, our print media, they're struggling and they need a break. C-18 won't apply in the short term, but in the meantime, newspapers are at risk of closing. Will the Minister of Finance announce an emergency fund for media until C-18 comes into effect? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Oh,
Thank
no.
you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Her answer's going to be short.
We're extremely concerned by what's happening in this sector, and that's why for several years we've established programs to better support both written media and all media. We've also worked hard to modernize our legislation to make things fairer between the cultural industry and for our creators. But the Conservatives have opposed everything we've done. I don't know why they have web giants in their pockets rather than being concerned about Canadian creators and Canadians.
That was a long answer for her.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. Honestly, Mr. Speaker, I think media and culture are tired of seeing this blame being spread around. We need the Minister to accept their responsibilities. And in the media and cultural industry, they said that the Liberals have nothing to brag about right now. They need concrete and urgent action. Our TV and newspapers need help now. And we saw it with TVA. We know what's happening with other media as well. Either we do nothing or let our media die a slow death, or we can act now and look for long-term solutions. Can the government set up an emergency fund, or will it stand around and do nothing against the backdrop of this media crisis? The Honourable Minister.
There is a media
Canadian
crisis,
Heritage. Mr. Speaker,
but I don't
our
think that there's much that we can do about it. I really don't like.
We've
I
established
don't think
programs.
there's an easy answer.
And we are open to all proposals and solutions to help this sector. I think the Conservatives have done nothing. They've never stood up for cultural workers, and every time they've been opposed to our legislation, and it costs jobs when we don't get things adopted, and also, we'll see what the real face of the Conservatives are in terms of replacement workers. And once again, they're going to have, they're going to be on the side of the rich and big corporations.
The honourable member from Brantford Brant.
I guess I shouldn't ask the question. Oh, Larry Brock is awesome.
Officials
The
and members
kingpin.
behave like the law doesn't apply to them. They mislead committee, they threaten co-workers and funnel taxpayer money through ghost contractors and even through their own companies. $54 million on the Arrive scam app is only the tip of the iceberg. Now the RCMP are investigating corruption with this NDP Liberal government. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Canadians have had enough of this blatant misuse of taxpayer monies. Is it finally enough for this Prime Minister?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker,
Oh,
as
yeah.
I've said time
Jen
and
O'Connell.
time again, we expect
Weirdo.
all contracts to be issued following the law as well as procurement regulations. Mr.
She
Speaker,
might flip out, though.
any actions of misconduct will come with consequences. We look forward to the report and the investigations that are ongoing. But, Mr. Speaker, once again, our expectations are that contracts are fulfilled and issued following the law.
The honourable member from Sherwood
She was calm
Park,
there.
Fort
Next time she might
Mr.
fly
Speaker,
off the
this
handle.
government has been in power for 8 years, and there is a profound dissonance between those alleged
Harry Potter.
expectations and what they have been delivering and doing these 8 long years. Arrive scam hearings have been explosive. This week, senior government officials accused each other of lying because a Liberal minister wanted someone else's head on a plate. This government is destroying trust in our public service, and this Prime Minister is clearly not worth the cost. Instead of trying to blame others, why won't this Prime Minister take responsibility for his Arrive scam disaster and commit to cooperating with the RCMP investigation?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, once again, we see the Conservatives trying to create a tax instead of focusing on the facts. And the facts are that any allegations of misconduct will come with consequences. Mr. Speaker, we welcome the investigations that are ongoing. CBSA has put in place measures addressing these procurement issues. And Mr. Speaker, we expect all contracts to be fulfilled following the law.
Last week, she was trying to start a scandal about the Conservatives having a bunch of stuff purchased for them by
The honourable member for
lobbyists.
Charlesbourg au
Found
Saint-Charles.
it strange.
Mr. Speaker, as if it weren't enough to have lost $173 million with Medicago, which left the country quickly without warning, now we've learned that PHAC has lost another $150 million with them for a total of $323 million.
speak
Money up in
English.
smoke, gone as if nothing happened. And those who are responsible are in the members' meetings. I would invite the former Minister of Health and now Minister of PSPC. I'll ask him, where's the money and what are they going to do to get it back?
There's so many scandals with these guys. Like,
The Honourable Minister.
so much money.
Mr. Speaker, throughout the
Mark
pandemic,
is dressed like a geek today.
well, those were really tough times. Then it was impossible to imagine that one day there would be a vaccine that would be available for all Canadians. And the government at that time made sure that we could make a choice with every legitimate option. And fortunately, thanks to that, we've had one of the best responses to the pandemic worldwide. We were there for all Canadians, and we're very proud of that, Mr. Speaker.
I find bow ties are hit and miss. That's a miss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all sympathize with the additional challenges faced by people with disabilities when traveling, especially by air. We have seen several cases in the media recently of unacceptable treatment of people with disabilities traveling by air, particularly with Air Canada. The Minister of Transport has called Air Canada to find out about their detailed accessibility action plan. Can he share the main points with us? The Honourable Minister of Transportation. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his excellent work. I did have a meeting today, which was very productive with my colleague, the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion, and Persons with Disabilities, and
Kenny
representatives of Air Canada, including CEO Michael Rousseau, to find out, well, I told them it was unacceptable, and I wanted to find out what concrete action they intend to do to redress the unacceptable treatment. They need perhaps specialized equipment, training, boarding and deplaning processes. And we've agreed to follow up with them.
You
in 2
got
weeks'
to
time.
know
Thank you.
when to hold
from
them.
Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
The Prime Minister's
Mike
handpicked chair
Bair's
of his
pretty good.
billion-dollar green slush fund says that she followed all conflict of
Here
interest
it is.
rules. But we learned at committee yesterday that she was the one that moved a motion that funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars to her company that she then took a $120,000 payday from. After 8 years, it sure pays to be an insider with this NDP Liberal government, and it's clear to see that this Prime Minister just isn't worth the cost. Canadians want to know if the NDP are going to support Conservatives in their calls for more hearings on this scandal, and they want to know who else got rich.
Who did get rich? The other night, these scandals, there's been so many of them.
I see the minister rising on this question, which was directed to which was directed to another party in this House. But I see the minister rising on the House. The minister.
Let them play, Greg. Yeah, let them go, Fergus. Sit down.
To answer this question, which is directed to the fourth party in this House. The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Not surprising that they won't get up to tell us who got rich. The question is obviously for the minister, and if he's too afraid to tell Canadians which of their insiders are getting paid, we learned yesterday from the hand-picked chair that she got $120,000 after moving a motion to get $200,000 paid directly to her company. Millions of taxpayer dollars are being funneled to ineligible companies through corruption and conflicts of interest at this very minute. This minister's officials said that heads would roll, people would be fired, they lost confidence in the board. They found out it was a political problem, decided they wouldn't fire anyone. The Auditor General is investigating, so should Parliament. We want to know who got rich.
Oh, good. That's a good one. He's really well spoken. This issue must be bugging him because he just delivered very well.
Any and all question that this member would have, Mr. Speaker. But let me bring a facts to the story, Mr. Speaker. By the way, this organization existed 10 years during the Harper government, Mr. Speaker. Let's bring some facts to the table. And one thing that Canadians should know at home, Mr. Speaker, the moment that allegations were brought to my attention, we launched a third-party investigation, Mr. Speaker. And on the basis of that report, Mr. Speaker, we took immediate action to restore governance at the organization. Mr. Speaker, we will not shy away to take any and all actions needed to make sure that they have proper governance at the institution.
He's a funny little clown.
Colleagues, when the Speaker recognizes a person to ask a question or for a person to answer the question, there is an expectation, matter of fact it's in the regulations, that all members are not to speak until that person is finished speaking. And so I'd ask the member from South Shore St. Margaret's, please, to try to, who had a question today, to please be respectful so that all members can listen to the members who are asking or who are answering questions.
Come on, Greg, sit down.
The honourable member for Levis-Lotbinière. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years of this Liberal government, conflicts of interest are piling up at breakneck speed. A federal green fund paid
He doesn't look like a human being.
$17,000
something
to the
about him.
chair of the Board of Sustainable
funny
Development
looking.
Technology Canada. Mr. Speaker, being able to approve public funds from a federal foundation to one's own company is an obvious conflict of interest. Does the government still have confidence in the chair of the Board of Directors? This is yet another Liberal scandal.
He's dramatic like that, though. Jacques Gordon's pretty funny. He's just funny looking as well. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the way his mouth moves.
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Honourable colleague for his question. I don't think he'd be able to use this clip because this company survived for 10 years under the Harper government. But on this side of the House, what did we do? When we heard of these allegations, we asked a third party to investigate allegations. We received the report and we asked for concrete measures. We have higher standards for all funds that are given by the Government of Canada. And we're going to go to the bottom, get to the bottom of things.
I think she does.
The honourable member from Kitchener
She's the worst. Freeland is the worst.
Replacement workers
Currently.
distract from the bargaining table, prolong disputes, and can poison workplaces for years after. The best deals are made at the bargaining table.
Oh, Valerie.
And our economy depends on employers and unions staying at the table to reach the best, most resilient deals. That's why in 2021, our Liberal team committed to the banning of the use of replacement workers. Today marks a historic milestone. Could the minister advise this House how we're delivering on this commitment?
Oh, man. Trying to slow it down, I guess. Can't have too much fun.
I thank the honourable member for her question. We were glad to work with the NDP on this piece of legislation. It fulfills a promise that we made on page 22 of our platform in 2021. And it also is very much in keeping with the spirit of tripartitism which this country is built on, where business, unions and government work together on major issues that affect this country. May I say it is richer and better for having worked with the NDP on this legislation, and I look forward to continued debate by members in this House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Seamus must have got bumped in the head or something.
Moody, Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are abandoning caregivers again. They promised to make the Canada Caregiver Credit refundable, yet people are still waiting. We are in an affordability crisis. Unpaid carers are struggling to keep up with the cost of living. Meanwhile, the Liberals are missing in action. Caregivers deserve better. Will the Liberals finally live up to their promise and immediately deliver the refundable tax credit?
Bravo. The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like
WEF.
to assure you that in terms of the CRA,
Just saying.
there is a tax credit for caregivers, and we would like to promote this credit to make sure people are well aware of it. And yesterday, we used tax clinics with volunteers to promote these programs for those who need it most.
And if I may, it's good to see the honourable member from Saanich Gulf Islands in the House and recognize her for a question.
What do we get? Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
She must not be well because she's always been online. Maybe she's unhealthy, so they're happy to see her because it's weird for all the parties to applaud somebody being present.
I got a chance to speak to the House on another occasion that I wanted to run around and hug everyone. I haven't reached you all yet, but I am very happy to be back. My question to the Honourable Minister of Environment, he may not be so happy to see me back, but it's based on the report from the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development, whose report says this clearly, quote, the 2030 emissions reduction plan is insufficient to meet the 2030 emissions reduction target. To which I add, the 2030 emissions reduction target is too weak to meet our global share of responsibility for the Paris Agreement goals of holding to 1.5 and as far below 2 degrees as possible. But the Commissioner did say there's barely enough time to do more to meet the weak target. Will this government cancel the TMX pipeline, ban fracking, and put in place an excess profits tax on the oil and gas?
I like the idea of an excess profits tax. I'm not going to say that I don't like that idea a lot.
Minister for the Environment and Climate
Goodness
Change.
gracious.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague. It is good to see her in this House, and I agree with the findings of the Commissioner. We need to do more. Our plan shows that we're at 34% towards a 40% emission reduction target. Since he has done his study, we have put out a number of new measures to help fight climate change and accelerate the reduction of climate pollution, Mr. Speaker, including zero emission vehicle mandate, new methane regulation, regulations, and by the end of the year, as the Prime Minister announced in New York, we will have a framework to cap the emissions of the oil and gas sector. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And so brings us to the end of
guys.
question period.
That just about does it. It was a pretty fun Thursday. I kind of thought it was going to be a letdown because it was so exciting yesterday. Poilievre was up there 20 times. It was crazy. It was just really entertaining. A couple of times, Trudeau even flipped out. But now today was pretty good as well. So we're happy to have that. Just to let you know, so now with not the show that I just made, I'm going to take something else and cut it up and have all of the translating taken out, get rid of Mr. Speaker and those delays. The new show flows really smoothly. It's a lot of fun, so I'll be posting that later on. I'm also working on another video that has to do with the Alan Reyes story where the Governor General's been spending $1,800 a month on dry cleaning, $1,000 on lemon wedges on air flights, and it's a good piece. I'm working hard on it. Anyhow, this is it. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Question Period Canada. I'm Ehren. It's always fun hanging out with you guys. Thanks a lot for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. Share it with somebody if you're watching. That'd be cool. Anyhow, we'll catch you tomorrow. Take care, guys. Have a good one.